Tomas Morin is the recipient of fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation and the National Endowment for the Arts. He teaches at Rice University and Vermont College of Fine Arts. Morin's most recent book came out just this month. It's titled Where Are You From? Letters to My Son. And though I've just began reading this new collection, I have been impressed by Morin's ability to digressively display open communication that weaves beautiful personal and genealogical histories with social commentary on the America he knows, the America that his son will grow up knowing, and the America that constantly questions his place in it. Morin is also the author of a phenomenal memoir, Let Me Count the Ways, which is winner of the 2023 Vulgar Genius Nonfiction Award. Let Me Count the Ways expertly navigates Morin's experience as a son himself, as well as his experiences with trauma and OCD. Throughout this memoir, Morin ruminates on the shaping of the self from the family unit and the ways we choose to love, to let go, and even to adopt and reform as something new in the wake of what seems unforgivable. He is also the author of poetry collections Machete, A Larger Country, and Patient Zero. He is co-editor of the anthology Coming Close, 40 Essays on Philip Levine, and translator of The Heights of Machu Picchu by Pablo Neruda. Please join me in welcoming Tomas.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction and for the prayer and all of you for having me here. It's it's a real delight and pleasure. Can everyone hear me okay in the back? It's my first time in, well, not Utah specifically. Pat and I spoke about this earlier, but this part of Utah. I'm going to read from one of the later chapters in this book, Where Are You From?, which is a collection of letters that I started writing to my son before he was born. And this letter, which occurs later in the book, I composed it after he was already born. And the context is, first, has anyone seen the movie Groundhog Day? Yeah. So that'll help you understand what happens. There's a way in which I relive a moment through a different lens each time in here. But the context is, I've just landed in Vermont, and a cab service that has been contracted to pick me up is about to pick me up and take me to, from Burlington, drive me an hour to a place where I'll be teaching. So each of the letters is to my son. So I'll just start here. All buckled up, we pulled away from the airport. His hair was long, and so was his beard. He was dressed in black and looked like one of the Oak Ridge boys, the one that looks like a wizard. In other words, the kind of person you would want on your side in a fight. We hadn't gone a mile before he asked, "Where are you from?" I mentioned that we had moved to Houston from Austin. With a mixture of joy and regret, he said he had lived in Austin for a few years. "I lived in Central Texas for over 20 years, and it's changed a lot," I said. "It sure has. I don't like how the liberals are taking over Austin. They have lots of biracial people there now," he said. I said as the Burlington city limits stretched behind us and we climbed into the darkness. "They have all these extra rights that normal people don't have. Same thing is happening in Vermont. When I retire, I'm probably moving to the Blue Ridge Mountains." A cover of Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill came on his radio. No vocals or any instruments except a piano. I'd never heard this version before. It haunted the stale air of the taxi. I Shazammed the song, but no dice. Someone else came up. I welcomed the silence while I tried to find the pianist on my phone. You already know it was Paul Hankinson because I played this song for you so many times. The driver said, "My son used to work in human services, went to college and everything." "That's great," I said. "He had to leave his job, though. Too many liberals in that line of work, too. Homosexuals, girls married to girls. I don't have anything against them. I have a friend who's gay. But a social worker should be straight because some people don't want to deal with that sort of thing when they go into the office to ask for help." "Oh," I said, as we slid between the green mountains on our way to Montpelier. I wonder what this man thought when he saw me walk out of the airport and get into his taxi. What did he think when he saw my name? Who did he assume I was when he heard my voice? You hear this guy playing the guitar? Yeah, I said. He's crap. He's only playing in one key. That's boring. I said. You have to switch it up. When I play guitar, I'll play in 3 different keys in one song. I can sound like 3 different guitar players. Wow, that's impressive, I said. As All I Want to Do started playing, he said, I love that Sheryl Crow. She really keeps her looks going. Proud lady. I fell in love with her when we were 18. You know Sheryl Crow? I said. No, we're just the same age. Problem was I was married and already had 2 kids, so I was stuck. She still turns me on. We took the exit to Montpelier, and before long we're crossing the Winooski River and climbing the steep road up to campus, where I would spend the week teaching writers how to use language thoughtfully in order to make poems people might pick up one day and find the mirror for their feelings that they've been waiting for. Oh, my son, the calculus I did in my head when he said what he said was both quick and long. And you know how math has always befuddled me as much as it delights you. Now don't tell me geometry is math, and how can I love one and dislike the other? Show my work? Is that what you want? You want to see the calculations I did to arrive at my response to him, saying that people who look like you and me ruined Austin? Okay, here is how I landed at my solution of, Scratch paper 1, shame. I don't like how the liberals are taking over Austin. They have lots of biracial people there now, he says. Bless your heart. What does that mean? He says. You know what it means. Are you calling me a dummy? He says. You just called yourself that with what you said. Oh, I get it. You must be one of those snowflakes, he says. Mister, I have a biracial son. How would you like it if you got in a taxi and the driver started in on how people like your son were ruining everything? Look, buddy, I didn't know about your son. I didn't mean any offense, he says. Maybe next time you'll think twice about what you say when you're driving someone. His face turns red and his hands grip the steering wheel more tightly. We drive down the dark highway without speaking. Running up that hill fills the silence, and by the time Sheryl Crow comes on, all I want to do is be out of this taxi, to stop shaking from the adrenaline that is pumping through my body, to stop looking at my GPS, to make sure he is still taking me to Montpelier, and not somewhere else, where no one will be around to watch us sort this all out like men. Scratch paper 2, anger. I don't like how the liberals are taking over Austin. They have lots of biracial people there now, he says. What the hell do you have against biracial people? They're messing everything up with their whining, he says. My son is biracial, you ignorant asshole. Who are you calling an asshole? He says. Did I stutter? I don't have to take that kind of abuse, he says. Abuse? I call you out for all the dumb shit you just said, and now you're the one whose feelings are hurt? Hey man, I didn't mean anything by it, he says. What do I care what you meant or didn't mean? Would it have been easier for you if I just sat here quietly, let you run your mouth and not said anything? Huh? Would that have made you feel better? Look, buddy, I'm sorry, he says. I'm not your buddy. You can keep your sorries. The college paid you to drive this taxi, not to say ignorant, stupid shit to the people you pick up. So drive. I don't want to waste my time talking to you anymore. His knuckles are white, and he doesn't say anything anymore. Running up that hill comes on, and he drives faster. Someone calls him, and he can't remember how to cancel the call, so just pushes buttons until it stops ringing. Sheryl Crow comes on as we cross the Winooski River. I wonder how close I came to him, leaving me on the road. Scratch paper 3, hate. I don't like how the liberals are taking over Austin. They have lots of biracial people there now, he says. What makes you think things were any better when people like you were running the show? Excuse me? He says. You heard me. All you ignorant white people think the same. You all think you're hot shit and better than everyone else. Well, I've got news for you. Your life is just as pathetic as the next person's. You don't know anything about my life, he says. Oh, I think I know enough just by looking at you. Hey, he says, did I hurt your feelings, Gandalf? You can't talk to me like that, he says. I'll talk to you any way I want as long as I'm in this car. You're a pathetic loser who thinks the world owes you something. What's worse, you think people don't look like you stole your future. You probably think you were supposed to be a famous musician or something. Well, you can't just look like ZZ Top and expect it to happen, man. And I got news for you. If it hasn't happened yet, it's not going to ever happen. Ever. Do you understand? The car slows down as he pulls onto the shoulder of the highway. Let me guess. You're going to ask me to get out of your taxi now because your feelings are hurt. He walks to the back of the car and opens the trunk. He grabs my suitcase and says, "Get out, now." I open my door and step out. He sets my suitcase at my feet and stares at me. You leave me here and I'll have your job in the next 5 minutes. I'll tell your boss that either they fire you or I'm going to sue them until their head spins. I can see the news headlines in the Vermont papers now. Taxi driver leaves professor stranded. What do you think they're going to choose? Your job or millions of dollars? Bet you want to hit me, don't you? Do it. I'd love to send your ass to jail. He gets back in the taxi without saying a word. The only sound is the hum of his engine, the passing cars, and a beautiful rendition of Running Up That Hill on piano as he drives away and I stand under the beautiful Vermont sky dotted with stars. Scratch paper 4. Rage. I don't like how the liberals are taking over Austin. They have lots of biracial people there now, he says. You fucking woodchuck, I say, and lunge at him. I mean, this is really speculative here, you know. It's so out of character for me. My hands grab his throat and the car swerves from one lane to another. I can't even read it without laughing. As he reaches back with his right arm and tries to hit me in the face. But I hold on and say, take it back, take it back. He drives off the shoulder and the car flies into the air. It's a good place for a water break. Try to compose myself. We were talking just before about in one of the seminar rooms about how slapstick, you know, and seeing people actually get hurt is it hits that reflexive funny bone. Everything moves slowly now. My seatbelt yanks me back, and as we roll the sky becomes like the blackest, most still lake, and the grass is the side of a mountain that is so high you can't see anything beyond or around it. Life is upside down, then it isn't, and then it is again. When I wake up, Sheryl Crow is singing, "All I want to do is have a little fun before I die." I can't feel my legs or my arms. My head is wet, the windshield is gone, and so is the driver. I think how great it is that Vermont doesn't allow billboards on their highways, so I could be lying here staring up at a sign that says, "Do billboards work? It just did." I worry that if no one finds me here in the dark, then soon I will be gone too. There will be one less person in the world to snarl at whatever and whomever means you harm, my son. Scratch paper 5. Pity. I don't like how the liberals are taking over Austin. They have lots of biracial people there now, he says. How do you know I'm not biracial? You don't look it, he says. What does biracial look like? He says, maybe the better question is, who isn't biracial? I have family that came over on the Mayflower, he says. Oh yeah? Well, what about your other family? How many people do you think are 100% pure anything? I did that DNA test, and I'm Spanish, Indigenous, Italian, Jewish, North African, Senegambian, and Guinean, and Nigerian. That's crazy, he says. Hell, it even said that around 1700 I had one relative who was Korean. 100% Korean? He chuckles. Haha, okay, you got me there. But you get my point. When we turn people into labels and they become less than human. And if history teaches us anything, it's that this only leads to a lot of pain for everyone. My son is probably someone you would call biracial. I'm sorry, man, he says. Thank you for saying that. You can't just go off saying crazy stuff like Trump because you might have someone in your backseat who's on the edge and just waiting for an excuse to beat someone's ass. You're right, he says. Last thing you want to do is to end up plastered on the side of a mountain, hoping the car you flip doesn't catch fire and explode. He nods his head. And as a haunting cover of Running Up That Hill comes on the radio, he changes the station. Surprise, surprise. Bob Dylan sings, "You're invisible now. How does it feel? How does it feel?" Bob Dylan sounds the same on every song. Don't get me wrong, I love Dylan, but the key to real good music is variety, he says. Amen. We listen to music silently the rest of the way as the minutes and the miles zip by on our way to sleepy Montpelier. Scratch paper 6, humor. I don't like how the liberals are taking over Austin. They have lots of biracial people there now, he says. That's a weird thing to say. Aren't you biracial? Me? He says. You look like you're at least 50% Vermonter, 50% deadhead, and I don't know about the other 50%. When he laughs, the long hairs of his beard shake like a silver curtain. Mister, you're funny, he says. It's been a hell of a long day. Thought maybe you could use a laugh as much as I could. He laughs and says, the Grateful Dead had some good tunes, but I could never really get into them the way some people did. I hear you. I've never really gotten into their music either. Their fans are like a cult, and I'm wary of any group that wants you to belong to them that much. I know that's right, he says. Even though I can't make out Camel's Hump in the darkness, the Green Mountains are just as beautiful at night as they are in the day. Running Up That Hill comes on, and I say, this Kate Bush song never gets old. They could do a version on a recorder, and it would still have the same power to slow everything down while also pumping you up. Like right in the middle of your chest. This song makes you want to find someone you love and give them a long hug. Amen, brother, he says. This is the last one. Scratch paper 7, love. I don't like how the liberals are taking over Austin. They have lots of biracial people there now, he says. That's not a nice thing to say. How so? He says. It's not nice to talk about people like that. It's disrespectful. I didn't mean no offense by it. I was just trying to make conversation, he says. I know, but talk like that hurts people's feelings. There's enough shit in the world we all deal with every day without us making it worse for each other, you know? I'm sorry, he says. How would you feel if I got in your cab and started in on how these redneck woodchucks were ruining Vermont? And how they were too stupid to see that someone like Trump, their messiah, hates them? Hell, if you were stranded on the side of the road with your thumb out, you'd be lucky if he didn't run you over when he passed you by. He says. He hates anyone who isn't like him. We're not millionaires who can scratch his back, so that means you and me. Maybe, he says. The silence between us fills with Running Up That Hill. The soft notes of the piano remind me of sighing in the rain. If you were stranded on the side of the road at night, who do you think would stop to give you a ride? Me or him? Probably you, he says. Heck yeah, I would. I can't see his smile, but I feel it. And suddenly, even the stars feel like they're smiling. I lean my head against the window and think about the beautiful days ahead, filled with work and joy in a place I love. We exit, and Sheryl Crow lifts the night when she sings, I got a feeling I'm not the only one. Thank you. So that's the first time I've ever read that in public before. Yeah, I thank you for bearing with me on it. It's not an easy thing to read just because of the not just because of the humor in the rage section, but because also it's a letter written to my son. So I'm reading something that's first draft. I thought this thing will never get published. But it's something I can save. I can save for him. So it's going to take me some practice. But thank you for being a wonderful audience, and I'd love to know if you have any questions. I hope that someone else might be able to get something out of sort of eavesdropping, right, on my conversation with him. So like that selection that I read, for example, like really working, showing my work, right, really working through, like all those scenarios I probably went through in like a second, right, in that moment when he said what he said. And I feel like this came up in the conversation earlier, we usually don't take a beat to think about how we want to respond. Instead, it's just whatever's reflexive, right? Whatever's sort of past experiences we've had have built into this kind of reflexive response system we have. So, I mean, one of the things I was hoping was that, for example, in that section, someone reading it or listening to it might think, oh, like, maybe I should take a beat before someone says something that makes me uncomfortable, before I respond. And by showing my work, I mean, that's a lot of the ways that's how we learn math, for example. You know, it's we see the problem, we see all the parts of the problem laid out, and likewise all the parts of the solution. You know, if we just see the solution, then how will you know how someone got there? And I think, like in a scenario like this, I mean, some of those hypotheticals are like so far out of my character that is funny, right? But then there's others that are closer, like the last one, the love section, where I could do that if I had the right amount of courage in that time, right? Because that's one of the things that's missing too. Is like what's the fuel that leads to whatever response, you know? And sometimes I think kindness requires more courage than hate, you know, or anger. Yeah. So my hope was that someone overhearing this conversation with me and my son would maybe find a way to slow down, right? Slow down the way they think, the way they feel, and the way they respond, you know, in really difficult situations. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. What is the role of pain in my art or art in general? You know, it took me until I had published many books before I think I was writing like an artist statement for a grant or something I was applying for. One of those things that we hate to do because it requires you to sort of step back outside of yourself as an artist and look at yourself from this level of distance, right? To try to describe what it is you've been doing or you perceive yourself as doing. And it wasn't until that moment that I realized, oh, like I've had basically one single theme my entire sort of like publishing career up to that point, my life as an artist, which was the theme of how do we endure suffering? And you don't get to that theme without pain, right? And once I realized that, I had that moment of revelation. It was one of those moments where, if my life were a film, there would have been this montage of like flashbacks into my past, and me reading the Bible as a child, and the Book of Job being my favorite part. You know, my favorite story in the Bible. I mean, what kid picks the Book of Job? You know. So it would have been this entire montage, and I was like, oh, so like I've been writing around and through the question of suffering this whole time, and I had a lot of feelings about that because I thought I was writing lots of different stuff. I just didn't realize that was had been such a preoccupation in my art. So, I mean, to try to answer your question, I think I was partly writing around that theme because I wanted to read things around that theme. And a lot of people write about pain, right, and write about suffering. But I was really interested in the endurance part, right? How do we endure it? Like, I know it happens to us. And sometimes we are the agents of that suffering, for other people. Like, how do we survive it? Toni Morrison has that thing, the famous quote that's always making the round on memes about, I'm going to paraphrase it badly, how there's a book you want to read that's not out there, you should write it. So I was just trying to come at it, from that angle. Also, I'd like to write about something else. Now that I realize that I've spent so much time and so many pages about that, I'd like to write something else. And becoming a parent, especially later in life than some of the folks in my generation, has really changed how I approach my subject matter. So I was 42 when I was 42 when my son was born. I was a few months away from 43. And suddenly I started doing math very differently. Well, how old will I be when he graduates from high school? Will I still be alive? Okay, yeah, that's mathematically possible. So, like if he gets married around 30, maybe starts having a family then, will I still be alive? Still be around to be a grandfather? Okay, that's mathematically possible, and I started doing math differently. And I also started feeling like I wanted to, there was a definite shift, in particular in my poetry, from writing through masks and personas and in dramatic monologues to just writing as myself. Because I thought at some point I won't be here anymore. And I want my son to be able to open up the things I've written, the books I've written, and not just find me in there, but also find himself. Like, to find us, in there. So in a way I feel like I'm kind of building these mini archives or time capsules. I think this book is for sure a time capsule. I mean, he's 5 years old now. And the first letter was when he was written when he was still inside his mother. He hadn't been born yet. He was on the way. So, I feel like that's a really long-winded answer to a very simple question. Did I answer your question? Yeah. Wow. Have I made a contribution? I hope. I don't know. I mean, that's a wonderful question. I feel like it's the kind of question that it's better suited for someone else to answer, because so much of it depends on how readers are responding, right? Readers are responding to what I've written. And I try not to go on Goodreads, I try not to read Amazon reviews and stuff like that, or because we all know it's so easy to be a sort of keyboard warrior, right? People are so comfortable saying things in writing online anonymously that they would never say to us, face to face. And it's, in particular with this book, there's a part of me that kind of hopes no one reviews it, and people just find it in a bookstore and it means something to them. Maybe they share it with someone, but that I actually have no way, would prefer to kind of have no way to know what people think about it. Face to face would be fine, but not like online. I don't know. I mean, this book it's in a tradition, right? I had an article, a reading list article that came out this week with Electric Literature, which is 7 books that are letters to family members. So like Jesse Lehman's Heavy is on there. Baldwin's A Fire Next Time, Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, and Imani Perry's Breathe, and like a few other books. So I don't know. I don't know what it contributes to the conversation. I just hope, my one sincere hope would be that if nothing else, that it gives some sort of energy to the conversation in order to keep it going. Even if it's just, if you think of like the image that comes to mind right now is the Olympic torch relay. And I forget how many people they usually get for that relay. I feel like it's quite a few. And in some stages, it's someone who they run it like 400 yards, right? They pass the torch and then they pass it on to the next person. I would be fine if I was just like the 400-yard person. That would be totally fine. Thank you for that question. Do I now prefer it? I think it creates an immediate intimacy. So if we think of genre in the broadest sense, a letter is a genre, a grocery list is a genre, speeding ticket is a genre, what we're getting at is form, right? And each form has its own limitations, but also its own opportunities. So I think the letter form, it immediately gets you to that most intimate of spaces, where at least for me, I don't know about others, but at least for me, when I sit down to write a letter, I don't feel like I'm performing myself. It's just me. There's all the different kinds of ways in which we perform the self kind of fall away. And in a letter, I don't have to be as organized and tidy in my thoughts as I am if I'm sitting down to write an essay, which feels kind of, officious, and there should be someone, blowing a trumpet, before I start, or a poem, where I'm like, okay, now my artist self is taking is putting their hands on the wheel, right? Whereas in a letter, it doesn't. It's all of myselves, right? It's all of myselves and also none of myselves. And when it's to my most intimate correspondent, my son, I'm just my most vulnerable self. Do I prefer it? I don't know that I prefer one like mode or genre over another. Earlier in the conversation we were talking about, I mentioned how one of my favorite analogies for the art and craft of writing is shoemaking, right? Being a cobbler. So, like the question where you said, do you prefer it? Like, is that a mode that I prefer now? It's kind of like, see me run a really good race in, a brand new pair of, Nike cross trainers, and being like, so like, is that your preferred shoe now? Well, I have lots of shoes, right? If I need to run really fast, that's the pair of shoes I'm going to wear, right? But if I'm going to be here, I'm wearing something different. If I'm doing something else, it'll be a different thing. So in that way, I feel like the ways in which shoes help us move through the world, right, and offer different kinds of support and say different things about us. I feel like all the different modes and genres also function in that way, because there's a certain kind of expectation, Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, it varies. Before I talk about the periodic table one, so when I'm writing a poem, the sort of like typical process has been for years, and sometimes it's different, has been I'll do the first draft, and like most first drafts of anything, I'll be dissatisfied with it. And usually it's the dissatisfaction comes from uh, realizing that the form isn't serving what I'm trying to say. So, like in poetry, I'll be like, okay, so maybe I'll run it through some what I call style filters. So I'll go to my bookshelf and I'll pick 7, 10 books by different poets who have a style that is so unique that if you were to try to imitate them, people would immediately know that you're ripping someone off and being derivative. So I'll pick those off the shelf, set them by my desk, and then I'll just start reading the first one. Let's say Gerald Stern, right? American Sonnets. And so then I'll do a second draft of my poem through a sort of like Gerald Stern style filter. So in terms of American Sonnets, very associative, run-on kind of syntax. So then I'll do that. And then I'll do a third draft where maybe I run it through like a Jory Graham kind of style filter. And I'll do a fourth draft where I'll run it through someone else, Terrence Hayes, right? And then I'll just keep going. Do that like 7 or 10 times. And by the time I get to the 10th draft, there's a tiny bit of each one of those styles that still remains because it's changed so much. It's gotten, it may go from like a quarter of a page long to 2 pages long, and then it contracts back. Maybe the lines get wider, and then they get more narrow, and maybe there's rhyme that's thrown in there, and all of this is changing and changing and changing. So by the time I get to that 10th draft, there's a little piece of each style that still remains, but now it's such a hodgepodge that now it sounds like me, and it doesn't really sound like any of the others. It's kind of like when you get a bowl, you're gonna out on your kitchen counter you have like 10 different ingredients, right? To make something, you put it in the bowl, and once it's all mixed up and it's cooked, it doesn't look like any of those ingredients, right? It's a new thing. So I've been doing that practice of the style filters for a long time. So that helps. That helps a lot. And I feel like there was a second part to your question. Oh, the I. You asked about I. So with that one, so the poet I had been a teacher of mine in graduate school. My MFA, she was my professor in my third year. She was a visitor. And I'd wanted to write an elegy for her for a long time, but I didn't know how to do it, and so that was like a piece of homework that was always in the back of my mind. And one day I just happened to glance at a periodic table, and I was like, oh, like what if I treated her as if she were an element from the periodic table, and her name already fits, right? It's the AI. And so then I researched the periodic table and the different modes of classification, and I was like, okay, boiling point, melting point, history of uses, all these things. And I was like, okay, so if each one of these is a sort of like prose poem stanza, like what would I say about her? So then that started filling in, and it wasn't until maybe the 5th draft where I thought, okay, if I'm going to do this, I need to go all the way and actually make that box that has atomic number and all of that, right, as the title. And so that was just, it was a thing where I didn't know if it would work, and I just saw it, and I was really excited, and I was really excited and hopeful. And it stayed in that form. Yeah, so sometimes the first form that I pick is the one that sticks, but more often than not, I have to end up, fishing around for something else. Not about changing, but I guess there is, some worry, but that might also just be, I have an anxiety disorder, I have obsessive compulsive disorder. So that could just be, I don't know how much of that is just the OCD, like worrying over, like ruminating over, like, for example, the thought, what if that cab driver reads this someday, which would probably never happen, but who knows? They might have like a very liberal, progressive person in their family who's like, "Hey, Dad, you look like one of the Oak Ridge Boys. Is this you?" In this chapter of this book, and what would that person think? And I guess like as writers, we're semi-public people, right? As professors, he could get my email address at my work, just public information, and send me an email, and what would he say? I don't know. I would hope we'd have a good conversation, about it, but also I don't know this guy, other than the whole Sheryl Crow thing, and like that was real, the songs and all of that was like really real. What he said about the Grateful Dead, but yeah, so, but again, that's like, should I really be worried about that? Probably not. It's not like I think about it every day. What I worry more than anything would just be, that the people who need this book and who are trying to find ways to articulate these kinds of experiences that we often don't talk about because it's just easier, it might help them, find a way to talk about it, that feels safe and constructive as well. Yeah, you said it best. I definitely had to embrace it. Like with the rage part, now I'm remembering I was laughing when I typed it. So it makes sense that I would be laughing, when I'm reading it. Although I wasn't prepared for the laughing, I was like, they're gonna think I'm not a professional. I can't, read my own stuff without, cracking up. But yeah, you just had to like embrace it and then see the scene through, right? Because it's one scene, right, that I'm just rewriting, in order to see where it would end up. But sitting at a computer, typing it is, it's a pretty safe space, to imagine these things. It's not like I'm on stage in front of a bunch of people working this material, right? Working it out verbally. Like that would be completely different. I don't know that I have whatever it takes to do that. Like stand-ups, the way they do that. Yeah. And also, I thought one thing that helped me embrace it was, Yeah, just the thinking, I never expect anything I write will be published, when I'm doing the first draft. It's just, so that makes me feel very free to just write, just write anything. Are we at time? Is that? Okay. There's one more burning question that you've been itching to get off. Yes. Yeah, well, for one thing, like in all those, for example, in the part that I read, like I'm trying to be very mindful about privacy, and like I don't share pictures of him on the internet, on social media. I don't think anyone should have their picture shared online without their consent, and he's not old enough to consent, to that. I want to talk about these things, but I'm also, as you can tell from the book, deeply, deeply protective, of him and his privacy, and I want him to, have his life and his privacy within it. But then at the same time, for me, the big win was with this book. We walked into the bookstore last week where I was going to have my lunch a few days beforehand, and right there at the front counter was this big display of this book. And I said, look at that, what's that? And he said, that's my drawing, because it's his drawing on the cover. And I said, that's right. And then I flipped to the back of the cover, and I said, what does this say? And he recognized his name, because he's credited as the artist, for the cover art. My grandfather was illiterate. He only spoke Spanish. He could not read or write in any language. And to go from, over the course of two generations, for him to have, my grandfather to have a grandson who's a writer with books, right? That's huge. But then to have a great-grandson who as a child can walk into a bookstore and see his artwork, or open up a book and see a picture of his father on the dust jacket. Like that's some, in terms of like repair and like growth, that is immense, and like absolutely priceless, which means more to me than any kind of award or book review or or anything. Well, thank you again for being such a wonderful, wonderful audience, and for having me.